Hi everyone, I'm Chef Susie with Escoffier Online, and welcome to our show this evening. I'm going to be making the raspberry mousse assessment today. And what's nice about the raspberry mousse recipe is you can substitute any fruit puree later on. You can substitute mango with a little bit of orange juice in it, strawberry or blueberry or whatever you like, even peach. But for your first assessment, go ahead and make the recipe exactly as raspberry mousse. But hang on to this, it's a good recipe and it'll be fun to experiment with. You can even add some zest of lemon or lime or even a little lime juice with some strawberry. The variations are so many and vast that you'll have so much fun with it. So let's get started on the raspberry mousse. I have my sanitizing solution for my good sanitation practices. I've got my spray bottle and my container with my solution and a rag. However you want to use your solution is up to you, but be sure to clean your table before you begin and after you're done, and your small appliances too. And in your mise en place photo for your assessment, make sure that your sanitizing solution is somewhere off to the side or in the background where we can see it, so we know that you're practicing good sanitary practices. So knowing that, we're going to move this out of our way and get started. So the raspberry mousse is another one of these recipes that there's just a few ingredients to it and the end result is just amazing, like who would have ever thought. So let's get started first with the gelatin. You can use gelatin leaves. I know they're kind of hard to get if you don't have commercial access to them. And if you can't get the leaves, you can go ahead and use powdered gelatin. And if you're using Knox gelatin, which is probably the most popular one on the shelf, it's what I recommend, Knox has a great conversion for gelatin leaves. For each leaf of gelatin, you're going to use a half a teaspoon of the powdered Knox gelatin. So this recipe calls for 2 leaves, so I have a teaspoon of my powdered Knox gelatin. And I'm just going to soften the gelatin with a little bit of cool water, probably adding about 2 tablespoons. It's not something you have to measure, but don't put too much in. Don't put like a half a cup or something. You're just dissolving the gelatin. And I'm mixing it together, and it has an opaque look. And this is just for softening the gelatin. When you actually dissolve the gelatin, you're going to warm it and it's going to be clear. So that's the difference. Soften with the water, it's got a cloudy opaque look, then you're going to warm it and then you're going to get that clear look, and that's going to be when the gelatin is ready to be used in your recipe. So we're going to set this aside, and then we're going to mix our fruit puree, which is raspberry. I just pureed some frozen raspberries that I bought in the grocery section. I let them thaw overnight in the refrigerator. They come in a nice plastic bag. And I pureed them with a hand blender, and then I just pushed them through a strainer to get all of the seeds out. You don't want any of those raspberry seeds in your mousse because there are so many in the raspberries. You're going to be surprised when you start straining that and see all of those seeds. So we're going to mix our puree with our castor sugar. And this puree is room temperature. It's really important that this is room temperature for this assessment because we're going to be mixing it with our gelatin, and if it's cold, it's going to seize that gelatin. It's going to make almost like a rubber band effect. So now that our puree is mixed with our castor sugar, we're going to take our little bit of gelatin that we have here over to the stove, and we're going to put it on a bain-marie, which is a double boiler, and that's how we're going to dissolve this gelatin. So it really doesn't take much to dissolve the gelatin. It just needs to get warm, and it's just going to turn clear, and it's just going to kind of melt. You can see it. It just works on its own. And eventually it'll all be dissolved. It just takes a minute. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just kind of stay and watch it. So we'll give it a little mix to make sure it's all ready to go. And we have a question.
Can you explain what caster sugar is?
Of course. Okay, now that our gelatin is completely dissolved, we're going to take it back to the table. And we had a question about caster sugar. Caster sugar is superfine sugar. It's what's typically used in baking. And all of our recipes in the program have caster sugar in the recipes. You can find it on the shelf in your grocery store. It's sometimes called baker sugar or superfine sugar. And if for some reason you can't find it, you can make your own by putting some granulated sugar in a spice grinder and just grinding it up until it's super fine. Be careful because you can let it go too far and make powdered sugar with that spice grinder. So keep an eye on it and just give it a few turns. The superfine sugar dissolves a lot better in these baking recipes, so you'll find that you like it a lot. So I have my puree and my sugar, my gelatin is melted, and I'm going to whisk my whipped cream. And I'm going to grab it. I have the bowl in the refrigerator with the whisk. It's getting nice and cold. And I have the whipped cream in there too. You want it really cold for this recipe. Okay. So we have everything nice and chilled. If you have an ice bath attachment for your mixer, that's nice too to keep this on ice, especially in the warm weather or if your kitchen's kind of warm. But if you don't, just go ahead and put your bowl in the refrigerator and keep it nice and cool. So we're gonna mix this on a medium speed, a little bit on the high side, and we're gonna whisk this until it's a soft heat. So it's going to take a little while, so if anyone has any questions, it's a good time to ask. And I wanted to talk about sheet gelatin quickly. If you're going to be using the sheet gelatin rather than the powdered gelatin, the Knox brand that I used, you're going to take those sheets, which are leaves, and they're about maybe 6 inches long and about 3 inches wide, and you're going to soak them in cold water. They're going to be dry and crisp when you put them in the water, and then once you soak them for a little bit, they're going to get soft. They're going to pick up the water the same way that the powder does. And then you're going to pull them out of the water because they're saturated, and then you're just going to melt them on the stove, on the heat, on the bain-marie double boiler, the same way that you did with the powdered gelatin. And we have a question.
Can I use a gelatin substitute?
We had a question if you can use a gelatin substitute, and I'm not sure what kind of gelatin substitute. A liquid form of gelatin substitute. I would say I haven't used those, but check with the manufacturer for ratios and conversions in which you could use that instead of powdered gelatin, and then you can convert it yourself, but that's not something that I've used at all. There are modified starches out on the market that are instant that you don't have to cook or warm, and you want to stay away from those in these recipes. Stick with your gelatin. And we have another question. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, what can you use for a gelatin substitute as a vegetarian? You might be able to get some of those modified cornstarches and use some of those. There's a product that's called Instant Clear Gel, and if you can't use the gelatin, you're going to have to use something like that. And that's an instant product. You don't have to warm it up, so you're going to have to eliminate that step. So when you're ready, contact me and I can help you out with that. That's something that comes in a powder form, and you can mix it with a little bit of sugar, and you can just sprinkle it on top of your mousse, and that'll be a thickening agent. it works a little bit different, but if you can't use the gelatin because of dietary needs or whatever your needs are, we can work on a modified starch with you, okay? So our whipped cream is just about ready. Just gonna turn it up a little higher. You don't wanna make it too high because you're gonna be pushing in any air that you put into the cream. So we're gonna whip it until it's a nice medium soft heat. Not too soft because it's gotta hold the shape of the mousse. So while we're waiting, if anyone has any questions, I don't know if you have any questions on the trip to France that's coming up. And we have another question. The question is, can you make this into a sugar-free dessert? This, I believe you can, because you can substitute Splenda for the sugar using the manufacturer's conversion. And the sugar is only adding sweetness to this recipe, so I think it'll be just fine. And the raspberries that I bought in the store, in the freezer section, they were just frozen raspberries, but check the package to make sure that they don't have any sugar in them. Just look for frozen raspberries, or you can puree fresh raspberries too, to be on the safe side. But yes, this one will convert nicely to sugar-free. So our whipped cream is ready to go. And now we're going to be mixing our gelatin with our fruit puree. And as you can see, it started to seize up a little bit. So I'm just going to pop over to the stove to warm it up quickly. Okay, our gelatin is rewarming on the stove. That's going to happen from time to time, so just be mindful of that. And I'll bring it back in just a minute and we'll mix it with our fruit puree. So I kept my water on just for that reason, in case my gelatin firmed up on me so I could rewarm it easily. So we're going to go ahead and just add our gelatin into our fruit puree mixed with our sugar. And remember, this is room temperature, otherwise it's going to seize up on you. And we have another question.
I have a question on the trip to France.
Yes.
Due to visa reasons, I can only find out that if I can leave after August. What is the last date to make the initial deposit?
The question is, what is the last date to make the initial deposit? I'm pretty sure that you can wait up until weeks before the trip, but we'll find out about it and we'll make a post on the website so everyone knows in case you're planning, and maybe you won't know until the last minute if you can go or not. So we'll try to have somewhat of a cutoff date for you, but as far as I know, you can pretty much book up until the last few weeks of the trip. Okay. So I have my gelatin mixed with my fruit puree, and you just want to make sure that this is no warmer than room temperature. Otherwise, it's going to actually melt the cream. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour the mixture into the cream and we're going to be folding it together. And we have another question.
What would another fruit be to use besides raspberry?
The question is, what would another fruit be that you could use besides raspberry? I think that strawberries would be a nice fruit. Blueberries or a blueberry and strawberry combination would be really nice. Maybe a strawberry with a little bit of lemon or orange in it. Mango would work very nice, even apricots, and you can blend the different fruits. I suggest looking at the fruits that are in your freezer section because they're usually more reasonable than the fresh fruits, and kind of work from there, and you can make some combinations on your own. So I'm just gently folding the fruit puree into the whipped cream until it's all well incorporated, and then we're just going to chill this. And it's ready to go. It's just a really nice mousse. You'll be using this recipe for the years to come, and it is nice because you can substitute. But don't substitute something like orange juice. It's good if you mix the orange juice with some of your purees, but you need that pulp and that thickness for the mousse. So the mousse turned out very nice, and I have a batch that I made earlier and I put in the refrigerator, so it's a little pipeable. So this is how your mousse is going to look when it's done. So we're going to go ahead and grab the mousse that I made earlier. We have another question.
What about using watermelon?
The question is, can you use watermelon for your fruit puree? You could. You're just going to want to blend it really well in the mixer. And I would add a little bit of maybe raspberry or something pulpy to it, because the watermelon is mostly water and your mousse may not set up all the way, but you can easily add like some strawberry or some raspberry or even some peaches to that, and it'll give it some nice depth and layering in the flavor. So I've got some mousse that I made earlier, and we're just going to take this and we're going to pipe it into our glass. And this is such a nice mousse. You're going to be using this in your recipes for the years to come. I just have a plain tip, and I'm going to be using my star tip with my whipped cream for on top. So this is just a nice dessert. And we have our whipped cream. And I like to garnish this with some raspberries and some fresh mint and maybe a little bit of orange. And we're getting ready to wrap up for today. So if you have any questions on the assessment, you're going to want to get them in now. And don't forget that trip to France. It's going to be coming up in October. It's going to be a wonderful food and wine tour, completely guided. You'll be visiting Escoffier's hometown where he grew up. The house that he grew up in is now a museum. You'll be visiting the museum. You'll be meeting Michel Escoffier, who is the great-grandson of Auguste Escoffier, which is a huge treat. And then you'll be visiting the beautiful town of Nice, and also the very breathtaking city of Paris for lots of shopping, eating, and drinking wine, and just enjoying the beautiful landscape and all the landmarks. Try to imagine yourself in front of the Eiffel Tower drinking a cappuccino with maybe a little French pastry. It sounds wonderful to me. So consider the trip, and thanks for joining me today. And if there's no questions, we'll see you next week, okay? Surprised, your confidence will shine through, and we'll see you next week.